My twin sister convinced our parents to pay for her dream wedding by telling them I didn't want one, so I showed up to her rehearsal dinner with my own engagement ring. For 24 years, Celeste had been the golden child, while I lived in her shadow. She got the bigger bedroom, the newer car, the college fund that mysteriously doubled when mine stayed flat. Our parents had always favored her, not subtly, but with the kind of blatant preference that makes you question your own worth from childhood. The wedding lie was her masterpiece of manipulation. 6 months ago, when I'd casually mentioned wanting a small ceremony someday, she twisted my words into ammunition. She told our parents I thought weddings were outdated capitalist schemes designed to bankrupt families. She painted me as the cynical twin who'd rather spend money on backpacking through Europe than commitment ceremonies. She even claimed I'd called traditional marriage patriarchal nonsense during a family dinner I'd missed due to work. Mom and Dad bought every fabricated word. "We're so relieved one of you appreciates tradition," Mom had said, writing another $5,000 check for Celeste's venue upgrade. "Your sister has such bizarre ideas about romance." Dad nodded, adding an extra $1,000 for her dress alterations. At least we only have to pay for one wedding. The irony was suffocating. While they funded Celeste's fairy tale fantasy, I'd been quietly dating Fletcher, a gentle bookstore owner who collected vintage poetry and made me laugh until my sides ached. When he proposed during a thunderstorm last month, using his great-grandmother's Art Deco ring, I'd never felt more certain about anything in my life. We'd planned to announce our engagement at Sunday family dinner, but Celeste's rehearsal dinner invitation arrived first. Hand-calligraphed on cream paper, it felt like destiny presenting me with the perfect stage for revenge. I slipped the ring onto my finger and walked into the country club ballroom where Celeste held court in her flowing blush rehearsal dress. Crystal chandeliers cast romantic shadows across tables draped in silk and adorned with orchids that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The room fell silent as I approached her table, my heels clicking against marble floors. "Congratulations on tomorrow," I said sweetly, extending my left hand so the diamond caught the candlelight. "I have some exciting news to share too." Celeste's face drained of color. "When did this happen?" "3 weeks ago. Funny thing about weddings, turns out I do want one after all." I smiled at the stunned faces surrounding us. "Fletcher and I are thinking spring ceremony, something intimate and meaningful." Our parents stared in complete shock. Dad's face cycled through confusion, realization, then something much darker. Mom gripped her wine glass so tightly her knuckles went white. "But you said she was anti-marriage," whispered our cousin Delilah, loud enough for half the room to hear. The entire wedding party turned to stare at Celeste. Her fiancé Garrett looked between us, clearly sensing the dangerous undercurrent, but not understanding its source. Celeste's bridesmaids exchanged uncomfortable glances. "This is supposed to be my night," Celeste hissed through clenched teeth. "And tomorrow is yours too," I replied calmly. "I'm just sharing some happy news with family." But as I watched our parents' expressions shift from shock to cold calculation, I realized my announcement had done more than expose Celeste's lies. The way Dad's jaw tightened, how Mom's eyes narrowed as she studied my ring, something was terrifyingly wrong. Later, as guests mingled awkwardly around the dessert table, Garrett pulled me into the empty coat check room. "There's something you need to know about tomorrow," he said, his voice barely audible. "Something Celeste doesn't even know yet. Something I just discovered tonight." My blood turned to ice. Garrett's hand shook as he pulled out his phone, scrolling frantically through messages. The coat check room felt claustrophobic, hangers pressing against my back as he leaned closer. "Your parents approached me 3 months ago," he whispered. "They said Celeste needed someone stable, someone who could handle her impulsiveness." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He showed me his phone, bank statements, wire transfers, all from my parents' joint account. "They've been paying me," he said, his voice cracking. "50,000 to propose. Another 100 if I went through with the wedding. They said it was an investment in Celeste's future." The room spun. "You're lying." "I wish I was." His face was gray with shame. "I needed the money. My mom's medical bills. I convinced myself it wasn't that bad. That I could learn to love her." I grabbed his phone, scrolling through the messages. Dad's contact name was listed as business partner. The texts were clinical, transactional, updates on the wedding timeline, discussions about managing Celeste's expectations, and ensuring long-term stability. "But tonight," Garrett continued, "when your dad saw your ring, he pulled me aside. He wants to double the wedding payment if I can convince you to break up with Fletcher before the ceremony." My knees buckled. "What?" He said having both daughters married to suitable men would solve the family's succession problem. He called Fletcher a nobody who'd never amount to anything. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't about love or tradition. This was about control, about ensuring both Celeste and I ended up with men who could be bought, men who would keep us exactly where our parents wanted us. "Garrett," I whispered, "are you going to do it? Take the money?" He stared at the floor. "I don't know. I came here planning to, but seeing how they've treated you, how they've lied about everything," he looked up at me with desperate eyes. "What kind of family buys their daughters' husbands?" Before I could answer, the coat check door burst open. Celeste stood there, her rehearsal dress wrinkled, mascara smeared down her cheeks. "I heard everything," she sobbed. "Every goddamn word." Garrett stepped toward her. "Celeste, I can explain." "Explain what?" she screamed. "That you never loved me? That my own parents had to pay someone to marry me? That I'm so worthless even my twin sister gets genuine love while I get a bought and paid for husband?" The three of us stood frozen in the tiny room, 24 years of family dysfunction imploding around us. Through the door, I could hear the rehearsal dinner continuing. Laughter, clinking glasses, toasts about love and forever. "How long have you known?" Celeste asked me, her voice hollow. "I just found out. I swear." She laughed bitterly. Of course you didn't know. Perfect Fletcher with his perfect proposal and his perfect antique ring. You get the fairy tale while I get the transaction. Celeste, no. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing makeup across her cheek. You want to know why I lied to mom and dad about you hating weddings? Because I was desperate. Because every guy I've ever dated has left me for someone prettier, someone smarter, someone more interesting, someone like you. The pain in her voice cut through my anger. For the first time, I saw past the golden child facade to the insecurity underneath. So, when Garrett proposed, she continued, I couldn't believe it. Finally, someone who chose me first. I would have done anything to keep that feeling, even if it meant stealing your wedding fund. Garrett reached for her hand, but she jerked away. Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me with hands our parents have paid for. The money doesn't matter, he said desperately. I love you now, these past few months. Love me? Celeste's voice rose to a shriek. You love the $50,000. You love the $100,000. You probably love the bonus dad just offered you to break up my sister. Through the door, the dinner sounds grew quieter. People were starting to notice the commotion. I grabbed both of their arms. We need to figure this out. Together. Figure what out? Celeste demanded. How to save my sham wedding. How to pretend this whole family isn't completely fucked up? No, I said firmly. How to make them pay for what they've done. Celeste stared at me. What are you talking about? An idea was forming in my mind. Dangerous and satisfying and perfectly suited to our parents' manipulation. You said you heard everything. Did you record it? She nodded slowly, pulling out her phone. I started recording when I saw you two disappear. I thought you were having an affair. Play it back. We huddled around her phone, listening to Garrett's confession in tinny audio. Every damning detail was there. The payments, the terms, Dad's offer to break up Fletcher and me. This is evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, I said. Emotional manipulation, financial coercion. You sound like a lawyer, Garrett said. I work at a law firm, paralegal. I looked between them. We could destroy them with this. Publicly. Completely. Celeste's eyes lit up with something I'd never seen before. Not jealousy or competition, but genuine cunning. What did you have in mind? I smiled, feeling the same rush I'd experienced walking into the rehearsal dinner. We give them exactly what they paid for, but not the way they expected. 20 minutes later, we emerged from the coat check room with a plan that would either unite us as sisters or destroy what remained of our family. The rehearsal dinner was winding down, guests beginning to make their goodbyes. Mom stood near the exit, graciously accepting compliments on the beautiful venue and tomorrow's ceremony. Dad worked the room like a politician, shaking hands and making small talk about business opportunities. They had no idea their carefully constructed world was about to implode. I found Fletcher nursing a scotch at the bar, looking uncomfortable in his borrowed suit. He wasn't used to events like this, formal dinners with people who measured worth in trust funds and country club memberships. How are you holding up? I asked, sliding my arm around his waist. He smiled, but I could see the strain around his eyes. Your dad cornered me earlier. Asked a lot of questions about my prospects and long-term financial planning. My stomach clenched. Dad's fishing expedition had started early. What did you tell him? That I love you and I'll spend the rest of my life making you happy. He shrugged. He didn't seem impressed. I kissed his cheek. You're perfect. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Across the room, I caught Celeste's eye. She was standing next to Garrett, both of them wearing forced smiles as his groomsmen told embarrassing stories. She gave me an almost imperceptible nod. It was time. I walked to the center of the ballroom and tapped my champagne flute with a knife. The sound cut through the conversations, drawing everyone's attention. Excuse me, I called out, projecting my voice the way I'd learned in college theater. I'd like to say a few words before everyone leaves tonight. Mom looked alarmed. Sweetheart, this isn't really the time. Actually, it's the perfect time. I smiled broadly at the assembled guests. Aunts, uncles, family friends, business associates, all the people whose opinions mattered to my parents. I wanted to share some wonderful news with everyone here tonight. Dad stepped forward, his face darkening. We can discuss family matters privately? Oh, but this affects everyone. I gestured to Fletcher, who looked confused but joined me in the center of the room. You see, Fletcher and I are engaged, as I announced earlier. But what I didn't mention is how grateful we are to my parents for teaching us such valuable lessons about love and marriage. The room fell silent, except for the soft clink of glasses being set down. You taught us that marriage is a partnership, I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. A business arrangement where both parties benefit. You showed us that genuine affection is less important than financial security. Mom's face had gone pale. What are you doing? I'm following your example. I turned to face the crowd, many of whom were shifting uncomfortably. My parents believe in investing in their daughters' futures. In fact, they're so committed to this philosophy that they've been financially incentivizing marriage proposals. A murmur ran through the crowd. Dad started toward me, but Uncle Harold stepped into his path, suddenly very interested in hearing more. Celeste, I called out, would you like to share your story? My sister moved to stand beside me, her phone already in her hand. I'd love to. She pressed play, and Garrett's voice filled the ballroom through the speaker system someone had connected for the toasts. Your parents approached me 3 months ago. They said Celeste needed someone stable, someone who could handle her impulsiveness. They've been paying me $50,000 to propose. Another 100 if I went through with the wedding. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps, exclamations, the scrape of chairs as people stood up. Aunt Margaret nearly fainted, gripping her husband's arm for support. But the recording wasn't finished. Dad's voice came through next, captured when Garrett had pocket-dialed during their conversation. Having both daughters married to suitable men would solve the family's succession problem. That Fletcher character is a nobody who'll never amount to anything. The room erupted. Voices rose in shock and outrage. I saw several family friends pull out their phones, no doubt texting others who hadn't attended. This would be all over our social circle by morning. Mom pushed through the crowd toward us, her face a mask of fury and panic. "Turn that off right now." "Not yet," Celeste said calmly. "There's more." The recording continued with Dad's offer to double Garrett's payment if he could break up Fletcher and me before the wedding. By the time it finished, the silence in the room was deafening. Fletcher stared at me in shock. "Your father tried to pay your sister's fiancé to break us up?" "Among other things." I took his hand, drawing strength from his solid presence beside me. Dad finally found his voice. "This is absurd. You're taking things completely out of context." "Context?" Celeste laughed, a sound sharp enough to cut glass. "What context makes bribing someone to marry your daughter acceptable?" Garrett stepped forward, his face red with shame and anger. "I gave back the money, all of it, tonight." He pulled a cashier's check from his pocket, waving it in the air. "I won't be bought." The crowd pressed closer, hungry for every detail of the unfolding drama. Dad's business associate, William Chen, spoke up from the back of the room. "Robert, is this true? Did you really pay this young man to marry your daughter?" "It's a misunderstanding. It's fraud." I cut him off. "Emotional manipulation at best. At worst, it's conspiracy to commit multiple forms of legal and financial misconduct." Mom grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "You're ruining everything. Your sister's wedding, our reputation, our family." "No," I said, pulling free. "You ruined it the moment you decided to treat your daughters like commodities to be traded." Fletcher stepped protectively beside me. "Sir," he addressed my father, "I don't care about your money or your opinion of my prospects. I love your daughter, and I'll marry her whether you approve or not." "How noble," Dad sneered. "Easy to say when you're getting a trust fund baby." "Trust fund?" I laughed. "What trust fund? You spent my college money on Celeste's car. You spent my wedding fund on her engagement party. The only thing I'm getting from this family is trauma and abandonment issues." The truth hit the room like a physical blow. Several relatives who had witnessed the favoritism over the years nodded grimly. Others looked genuinely shocked to learn how completely our parents had failed both daughters in different ways. Celeste moved to stand on my other side. For the first time in our lives, we were truly united. "So here's what's going to happen," she announced. "Tomorrow's wedding is canceled. The deposits are forfeit. The flowers can be donated to the hospital, and the catering can feed whoever wants to show up for a very expensive lunch." "You can't do that," Mom whispered. "The contracts are all in my name," Celeste said. I checked, and since the marriage was procured through fraud, I have legal grounds to void everything. Dad's face was purple with rage. "You ungrateful, spiteful—" "We're not finished," I interrupted. "Celeste and I have decided to plan our own weddings. Together, without any financial assistance from you whatsoever. And without your attendance," Celeste added. "Neither of you are welcome at our ceremonies." The finality of it hit everyone at once. The gasps from relatives, the shocked expressions, the realization that they were witnessing the complete dissolution of a family. "You'll regret this," Dad said, his voice low and dangerous. "Both of you. You have no idea how hard life is without family support." Fletcher squeezed my hand. "Actually, they do know. They've been living it their whole lives." The aftermath was swift and brutal. By the next morning, the story had spread throughout our entire social circle. The canceled wedding became the scandal of the season, with speculation ranging from reasonably accurate to completely insane. Some people blamed Celeste for being materialistic. Others condemned our parents for their manipulation. Most were simply thrilled to have front row seats to such spectacular family drama. Mom and Dad tried damage control, claiming the recording was taken out of context and that we were having emotional breakdowns. But too many people had witnessed their rehearsal dinner confrontation firsthand. The story held together too well to be dismissed. Aunt Margaret called the morning after, her voice shaking with rage. "I knew your parents favored Celeste, but this is sick. How could they treat you both like chess pieces?" Uncle Harold was more direct. "Your father's always been controlling, but buying husbands? That crosses lines I didn't even know existed." The business fallout was immediate. Dad's company, built on trust and relationship management, began hemorrhaging clients. Who wanted to work with someone who manipulated his own daughter's lives so callously? The professional network that had taken him decades to build crumbled within weeks. Mom fared worse socially. Her position on various charity boards became untenable when the other women realized she'd been presenting herself as the perfect mother while orchestrating her daughter's lives like some Victorian patriarch. The quiet disinvitation from social events started within days. Meanwhile, Celeste and I discovered something remarkable. We actually liked each other. Without the competition our parents had fostered, without the constant comparisons and manufactured rivalry, we found we had more in common than either of us had realized. We both loved terrible reality TV shows and expensive wine we couldn't afford. We both carried the same wounds from years of conditional love and emotional manipulation. 3 weeks after the rehearsal dinner catastrophe, we met for coffee at Fletcher's bookstore. Celeste had moved into a small apartment downtown, using money from her canceled wedding vendors to pay the deposit. She looked tired but lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told me, curling her hands around her coffee mug. "About planning our weddings together." I raised an eyebrow. "You still want to get married? To Garrett?" She shrugged. "Not right away. But eventually, he gave back the money, and he's been going to therapy to figure out why he thought taking it was acceptable in the first place. We're starting over from scratch. And it turns out I actually do like him. When money isn't involved, when our parents aren't pulling strings, we work together pretty well." She smiled wryly. "Who knew?" Fletcher brought over a plate of cookies from the bakery next door, kissing the top of my head before returning to help a customer. "He's good for you," Celeste observed. He doesn't try to fix you or change you. He just lets you be yourself. Revolutionary concept, I said dryly. Right? She laughed. It's like discovering we've been doing relationships wrong our whole lives. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Fletcher recommend books to a young couple. His genuine enthusiasm for connecting readers with stories they'd love was part of what had drawn me to him initially. I owe you an apology, Celeste said suddenly. I looked at her in surprise. For the wedding fund thing. For lying about you not wanting to get married. For 24 years of treating you like competition instead of my sister. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. I was so desperate to be the favorite that I never realized how much it was costing both of us. You were the favorite, I pointed out. Was I? She laughed bitterly. They manipulated me just as much as they manipulated you. They just used different methods. You got neglect and criticism. I got pressure and unrealistic expectations. Either way, we both ended up damaged. I considered this. It was true that Celeste had always seemed stressed beneath the perfectionism. The straight A's, the flawless appearance, the constant need to exceed expectations. Maybe that had been its own kind of prison. They really fucked us up, didn't they? I said, spectacularly. She raised her coffee mug in a mock toast to overcoming our parents' psychological warfare. I clinked my mug against hers, to being actual sisters instead of rivals, to planning weddings they'll never get to see, to marrying people who chose us instead of being paid to. We dissolved into laughter. The kind of hysterical giggles that come from recognizing the absurdity of your own life. Other customers glanced over curiously, but we didn't care. For the first time since childhood, we were genuinely happy to be in each other's company. So, Celeste said when we'd recovered, what kind of wedding do you actually want? I thought about it seriously. Without the pressure of impressing anyone, without worrying about our parents' approval or expectations, what did I really want? Something small, I said. Meaningful. Just the people who actually love us. Where? Maybe the botanical gardens? Or that little vineyard upstate where Fletcher and I had our first weekend trip? Celeste nodded approvingly. Intimate. Personal. What about music? Fletcher's friend plays acoustic guitar, and there's this singer who performs at the bookstore sometimes. We spent the next 2 hours planning, not just my wedding, but the framework for both of our ceremonies. We'd have separate events, but coordinate them so close family and friends could attend both. We'd share vendors to keep costs down. We'd help each other with all the details our parents would have normally handled. It felt revolutionary, this partnership, this mutual support instead of competition. What about Dad walking you down the aisle? Celeste asked eventually. I shook my head immediately. Absolutely not. The whole tradition is about one man giving away property to another man. Besides, after what he did, Uncle Harold? Maybe. Or maybe no one. I considered it. Maybe I'll walk myself down the aisle. I'm not anyone's property to be transferred. Celeste smiled. I love that. What if I walk myself too? We could both break that tradition. Or, I said, struck by sudden inspiration, what if we walk each other? At both ceremonies. Sisters giving each other away to the people they love. Her eyes filled with tears. That's perfect. Planning 2 weddings without family money or assistance turned out to be an education in creativity and compromise, but it was also the most fun either of us had experienced in years. We discovered that when you're not trying to impress anyone, weddings become much more about celebration and much less about performance. My botanical garden ceremony would feature wildflowers and candlelight. Celeste's vineyard wedding would have string lights and local wine. Both would cost a fraction of what our parents had budgeted for her original extravaganza. Fletcher threw himself into the planning with characteristic enthusiasm, researching photographers and calling in favors from other small business owners. Garrett proved surprisingly useful as well, using his connections in the hospitality industry to secure vendors at reduced rates. Maybe this is how it should have always been, Celeste mused one evening, as we addressed invitations by hand. The 4 of us working together instead of everyone trying to control everyone else. We discovered that Fletcher and Garrett actually got along well once the financial coercion was removed from the equation. They bonded over their shared experience of being considered unsuitable by our parents, and their determination to prove that love mattered more than money. The guest lists were small but meaningful. Fletcher's family, who had embraced me warmly from our first meeting. The friends we'd chosen instead of inherited. Co-workers who had become confidants. A handful of relatives who had reached out after the rehearsal dinner scandal, expressing support and solidarity. Notably absent, our parents. They'd made several attempts at reconciliation, but each had come with conditions that proved they still didn't understand what they'd done wrong. We can overlook this whole misunderstanding, Dad had said during one phone call, if you both come to your senses and let us handle the weddings properly. This isn't a misunderstanding, I'd replied. It's a fundamental difference in values. You see us as investments to be managed. We see ourselves as people deserving of authentic love. Mom tried a different approach, playing victim. How can you punish us for wanting you both to be financially secure? Everything we did was out of love. Love doesn't involve deception and manipulation, Celeste had responded. Love doesn't require anyone to be bought or sold. After several failed attempts, they'd resorted to threats, cutting off financial support, which we'd never requested, removing us from their will, which had never been guaranteed anyway, and ostracizing us from family events, which seemed like a blessing rather than a punishment. Let them isolate themselves, Fletcher said pragmatically. Anyone who would side with them after what they did isn't worth having in your life anyway. He was right, but it still hurt. Not because I missed their approval. I'd stopped seeking that years ago. But because I mourned the parents I'd always hoped they might become. The realization that they were truly incapable of unconditional love was a grief that would take time to process. My wedding took place on a perfect October afternoon, surrounded by chrysanthemums and autumn leaves. 23 guests sat in white folding chairs as Fletcher's friend Tobias played acoustic guitar. The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of. Intimate, genuine, focused on love rather than spectacle. Celeste walked me down the aisle wearing a navy dress that complemented my simple cream gown. When she placed my hand in Fletcher's, she whispered, "Be happy," and I felt the blessing of sisterhood in a way I'd never experienced before. Fletcher had written his own vows, promising to support my dreams, honor my independence, and love me exactly as I was. His words were specific and personal, referencing inside jokes and shared memories rather than generic romantic platitudes. My vows focused on partnership and growth, on choosing each other every day rather than just in that moment. I promised to be his anchor when life felt chaotic, his adventure partner when it felt too stable, and his equal in all things. When we kissed as married partners, the small crowd erupted in cheers that felt more genuine than any applause from a larger audience would have been. The reception was held in Fletcher's bookstore, which we transformed with string lights and small floral arrangements. Local musicians played while guests browsed the shelves and shared stories about love and literature. Instead of a sit-down dinner, we had a casual cocktail party with food from several small local restaurants. Uncle Harold gave a toast that made everyone cry, talking about how proud he was to see me choose happiness over expectation, authenticity over performance. Aunt Margaret presented us with a hand-quilted wall hanging featuring quotes about love from famous books. "Your grandmother would have loved this," she told me privately. She always said marriage should be about two people choosing to build a life together, not about families merging assets. The evening felt magical in a way that had nothing to do with expensive decorations or elaborate entertainment. It was the magic of being surrounded by people who genuinely cared about our happiness, who celebrated our love without reservation or ulterior motive. Celeste's wedding took place 3 weeks later at the Vineyard, with slightly warmer weather and the same intimate atmosphere. I walked her down the aisle this time, wearing the navy dress she'd worn to my ceremony. Her vows to Garrett acknowledged their complicated beginning, but focused on their commitment to honesty and growth going forward. "We started with a lie," she said, "but we're choosing to build our truth together." Garrett's vows were raw and emotional, apologizing publicly for accepting payment to propose and promising to spend his life earning her trust and love through actions rather than words. Their reception featured local wines and farm-to-table cuisine, with dancing under the stars and heartfelt toasts from friends who had watched them navigate their unusual courtship with grace and humor. Both weddings cost less than $5,000 each, a fraction of what our parents had budgeted for Celeste's original ceremony. But they felt infinitely more valuable because every element had been chosen deliberately, meaningfully, with love rather than obligation. 6 months into married life, Fletcher and I hosted Thanksgiving dinner at our small apartment. It was our first major holiday as a family unit, and we'd decided to create our own traditions rather than trying to navigate the complicated dynamics of extended family gatherings. Celeste and Garrett brought wine and homemade bread. Uncle Harold and Aunt Margaret came with stories and laughter. Fletcher's parents drove up from Philadelphia with his grandmother's recipe for stuffing and endless enthusiasm for our happiness. We cooked together, told embarrassing stories about each other, played board games that devolved into competitive chaos. It was everything holiday gatherings should be: warm, chaotic, full of love, and terrible jokes. "This is what family should feel like," Celeste observed as we cleaned up afterward. "Chosen and joyful instead of obligated and tense." I nodded, watching Fletcher explain the rules of some complicated card game to Garrett while Uncle Harold dozed on the couch. "No one's performing, no one's keeping score, everyone just belongs." "Do you think they'll ever understand what they lost?" she asked, referring to our parents. I considered it. We'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Mom and Dad were struggling with the social fallout from the wedding scandal. Several long-term friendships had ended when people took sides. Dad's business was slowly recovering, but his reputation had been permanently damaged. Mom had withdrawn from most social activities, apparently unable to cope with the whispered conversations that followed her everywhere. "I don't think they're capable of that kind of self-reflection," I said finally. "They'll probably always see themselves as the victims in this situation." "That's sad." "It is. But it's also not our responsibility to fix or forgive." Celeste nodded thoughtfully. "I used to think family was something you were stuck with, that blood relations meant you had to accept whatever treatment they gave you. And now I know family is something you build, with intention and care and mutual respect." She gestured around the room at the people who had chosen to be part of our lives. "This is my real family." The following spring, Fletcher and I found out I was pregnant. We'd been casually trying for a few months, but the positive pregnancy test still felt surreal. We sat on our bathroom floor at 6 in the morning, staring at the little pink lines and marveling at the fact that we were going to be parents. "Our kid is going to grow up so differently than we did," I said, one hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach. "How so?" "Unconditional love. No favoritism. No manipulation or emotional blackmail." I leaned against his shoulder. "Just acceptance and support." Fletcher kissed the top of my head. "And bedtime stories from the bookstore. Don't forget the literary advantages." I laughed. "Our child is going to have the most well-read childhood in history." When we told Celeste and Garrett the news, they immediately started making plans to be the best aunt and uncle possible. Celeste, who had always been competitive about everything, surprised me by expressing nothing but genuine joy and excitement. "I get to be the fun aunt who teaches them inappropriate songs and buys them noisy toys," she said with glee. "And I get to be the uncle who sneaks them extra dessert and teaches them card tricks," Garrett added. It struck me that our children would grow up with a completely different understanding of family than we'd had. They would see adults who supported each other, celebrated each other's successes, worked through conflicts with honesty and respect. They would never question whether they were loved or wonder if affection